Spring, 1943. The morning sun slanted through the high windows of the San Leandro plant, catching the haze of welding sparks that danced in the air like fireflies. The rhythmic clatter of machines echoed across the floor, grinders, presses, power supplies humming in unison. Every man in the room moved with urgency. The war waited for no one. Edward Ted Nelson stood at the edge of the production line, his leather gloves tucked under one arm, his shirt sleeves rolled up. 2 years ago, he'd been just another frustrated welder at Mare Island Naval Shipyard. Now he was the president of Nelson Stud Welding Corporation, an empire built on persistence, ingenuity, and a refusal to take no for an answer. Across the room, a shipment crew prepared another crate bound for the East Coast. Each wooden box carried rows of gleaming stud welding guns, black, compact, deadly efficient. Stenciled across the lid, property of U.S. Navy, Bureau of Ships. Ted still marveled at that label. Just 2 years earlier, those same words had been the brick wall that blocked his every idea. Now they were his customers. He wiped his hands on a rag as the phone on the office wall rang sharply. Nelson Welding. "This is Ted." A gruff voice answered on the line. "Commander Harrison, Bureau of Ships Liaison. Mr. Nelson, we're shipping your new units to the Pacific. The fleet's requested immediate supply for carrier repairs at Pearl. Your process is now standard across the Navy." Ted smiled faintly. "That's good to hear, Commander. I'll have the next batch ready by Friday." "Make it Thursday," Harrison replied. "The war doesn't wait," the line clicked. Ted stood for a moment, the weight of the words lingering in the room. The war doesn't wait. He looked across the shop floor. Dozens of men, sparks flying, metal singing. This was their front line. Not in the trenches or cockpits, but here, in the factories, the foundries, the shipyards. This was how they fought. By mid-1943, Nelson's stud welding system was everywhere. Liberty ships, destroyers, submarines, even tanks. The process had become an invisible backbone of American war production. Every boltless connection, every steel plate joined in seconds instead of hours. A quiet victory in the war against time. At the Kaiser Yards in Richmond, construction time for a Liberty ship dropped from 200 days to less than 45. The Navy's destroyers, once bottlenecked by weeks of deck installation, were rolling out faster than the German U-boats could sink them. Stud welding wasn't just saving hours, it was saving lives. Ted's process meant more ships delivered, more convoys protected, more soldiers supplied. For every minute saved in a California shipyard, somewhere across the ocean, an American sailor might live to see another sunrise. But success brought its own battles. As orders surged, raw materials grew scarce. Copper, steel, and flux were rationed under strict wartime controls. Ted's company needed priority status from the War Production Board, a bureaucratic labyrinth of forms and waiting. He sat one night in his small office, light pooling over blueprints scattered across the desk. His chief engineer, Bill Carter, leaned on the doorway. "They're holding our copper request again," Bill said. "Without it, we can't keep up with Navy demand." Ted rubbed his forehead. "I'll fly to Washington myself if I have to." And he did. Within a week, he was in the Capitol, a simple machinist-turned-inventor standing before a room full of men in dark suits. Charts lined the walls, maps of supply chains, graphs of tonnage and steel quotas. The chairman, a sharp-eyed economist named John Hancock, glanced at Ted's file. "Mr. Nelson, you're requesting priority allocation for copper and ceramic imports. On what grounds?" Ted slid a photograph across the table, a black and white image of a destroyer under construction at Mare Island. Hundreds of studs welded cleanly across the deck beams, no scaffolding, no men crouched in dark compartments. "That picture represents 10,000 man-hours saved," Ted said quietly. "Every ship we build faster gives our sailors a better chance to come home. My process cuts deck installation time by 80%, but I can't build guns without copper." There was a pause and long measured. Then Hancock nodded. "You'll have your copper, Mr. Nelson, and the War Production Board will classify your plant as essential to the national defense." That night, as his train rolled back toward California, Ted sat by the window watching the dark countryside slide by. He thought of Emma, waiting at home, and of all the men whose lives now depended on his work. He didn't feel like an inventor or a businessman. He felt like a soldier, fighting with electricity instead of bullets. By 1944, Nelson Stud Welding Corporation had expanded again. New facilities in New Jersey, Michigan, and Illinois. Over 200 workers, 3 shifts, 24 hours a day. The company's motto, painted in bold white letters on the factory wall, read, "Faster, stronger, safer, Nelson." The process evolved too. Engineers developed automatic stud welding machines for large-scale assemblies. Entire panels covered in hundreds of studs welded in seconds. Naval architects redesigned ship components to take full advantage of the new technique. One engineer at Bethlehem Steel remarked, "It's like discovering fire again. We can build anything now." Ted visited one of the East Coast yards in late 1944. Rows of half-built ships stretched into the fog. Everywhere he looked, men were using his welding guns. Quick bursts of light, the hiss of arcs, the faint smell of ozone. A young sailor recognized him and shouted, "Hey, you're the guy who made these things." Ted laughed. "That's me, I guess." "Sir, these saved us weeks on the last carrier. The captain says we might sail early because of your gizmos." Ted nodded, his throat tightening. He'd dreamed of this moment for years, his idea. Born in frustration, now helping win a global war. Back in Vallejo, Emma still kept his original notebook, the one filled with sketches, calculations, and the words he'd scribbled in anger years ago. There has to be a better way. She looked at it sometimes when Ted worked late at the plant. The war was changing him. He slept less, talked less. The pressure of production, the constant stream of telegrams and orders weighed on him heavily. In December 1944, Ted collapsed at his desk from exhaustion. The company doctor told him to rest, but rest was a luxury the war didn't afford. "I can rest when the last ship sails," Ted muttered, and they kept sailing, every month faster, stronger, and safer. The Navy's Bureau of Ships later calculated that stud welding had saved over 50 million man-hours across all American shipyards by the end of the war. Enough labor to build hundreds of additional vessels. By mid-1945, as Allied forces closed in on victory, Ted was invited to Washington once more. The Navy awarded him the Certificate of Exceptional Contribution to the war effort, signed by Secretary James Forrestal himself. During the ceremony, an admiral shook his hand. "Mr. Nelson, you may not wear a uniform, but you've won battles all the same." Ted smiled faintly. "I just wanted to make things work better." After the war ended, his technology spread beyond shipbuilding, into bridges, skyscrapers, power plants, and automobiles. Everywhere steel met steel, stud welding became the invisible bond that held the modern world together. In 1947, the Navy invited Ted to tour a new aircraft carrier under construction. The ship's deck gleamed under the sunlight, seamless, perfect. Not a single bolt visible. He ran his hand over the smooth wood, feeling the faint hum of pride in his chest. A Navy lieutenant beside him said, "You know, sir, they say every stud on this ship carries your name." Ted chuckled softly. "Let's hope they're strong enough to carry the world." He passed away quietly years later. Long after the war, his invention still in use across every major shipyard on Earth. Few remembered his face, but every spark of a stud welding art carried his legacy. A symbol of persistence, ingenuity, and the belief that one man's idea could change the fate of nations. And in the quiet factories where steel still meets flame, his words remain true: there has to be a better way. March 1943. The assembly floor of Nelson Specialty Welding Corporation roared like a storm contained within 4 walls. Sparks rained from a dozen welding bays as machines hummed with the rhythm of urgency. Every flash of light meant progress. One more stud welded, one more weapon, one more ship closer to completion. Ted Nelson stood on a metal catwalk above the production floor, goggles hanging around his neck. 2 years ago, he had been an 11-a-day welder at Mare Island. Now he was the head of a company that had become a cornerstone of the American war industry. His name, once unknown, now appeared in Navy procurement documents and shipyard manifests from California to Maine. But success was not a comfort. It was a burden. The war demanded more every day. More studs, more guns, more output. Ted glanced at the latest telegram pinned to his clipboard. Urgent. Navy requires 250 additional stud guns by end of month. Priority level 1. He exhaled slowly. The factory was already operating around the clock. 3 shifts, 7 days a week. His men were exhausted, but no one complained. They all understood. Every gun they produced meant ships built faster, decks finished sooner, and sailors returning home alive. He walked down the iron stairs, the smell of hot metal and oil thick in the air. A foreman saluted him with a greasy hand. "Mr. Nelson, that new batch of flux caps just came in from Oakland. We can start testing the improved design tonight." "Good," Nelson replied. "We'll need every improvement we can get." The innovation never stopped. Nelson had begun experimenting with automatic feed systems, machines that could weld 100 studs in sequence without manual reloading. The goal was simple: eliminate every unnecessary motion, every wasted second. He often told his workers, "The enemy isn't just in Berlin or Tokyo. The enemy is time," and time was running faster with every day of war. In the summer of 1943, Nelson flew to Washington to meet with representatives from the Navy Bureau of Ships. The meeting was held in a plain, government office filled with cigar smoke and the smell of coffee gone cold. Commander slid a folder across the table. "Mr. Nelson, the Pacific Fleet needs rapid repair capability. We're losing ships to kamikaze hits, mines, and torpedoes. We need to make repairs in days, not weeks." Ted studied the diagrams inside. Damaged hulls, broken mounts, twisted steel. "Stud welding can do that," he said confidently. "You don't need to drill, you don't need access from both sides. Just clean the surface and weld directly." The commander nodded. "We've seen your results. Mare Island and Pearl Harbor are already using your system for emergency patch repairs. We want to expand it fleet-wide." Ted smiled slightly. It wasn't pride that moved him, it was validation. The same Navy that once ignored his letters was now redesigning entire procedures around his idea. When he returned to California, the factory was busier than ever. Women had joined the workforce, machinists, inspectors, and line operators, replacing the men drafted overseas. Ted treated them no differently. "If you can weld clean and precise, you're a welder," he'd say. He made rounds across the shop floor every evening, greeting his workers by name. They called him boss, but never with resentment. To them, he wasn't just a company owner. He was one of them, a man who still picked up a torch when production lagged. That summer, tragedy struck close. One of Nelson's delivery trucks carrying crates of flux caps to the Richmond shipyard was caught in an accident on the Bay Bridge. 2 drivers died, and a shipment was lost in the bay. Ted personally attended their funerals, quietly paying for the family's expenses. "They died serving the war, same as any man on the front," he told the grieving widows. It was moments like that which reminded him the cost of progress wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in lives. By early 1944, Nelson's technology had spread far beyond shipbuilding. The Army Corps of Engineers adapted it for pontoon bridges and field installations. Boeing and Lockheed engineers were experimenting with stud welding in aircraft frames. Even the British Royal Navy requested technical assistance, sending a delegation to study the process. One British officer, during a factory tour, remarked, "Mr. Nelson, your gun is as valuable as any artillery piece we've built." Ted smiled. "Ours fires sparks, not shells." But the work took a toll. Long hours, constant travel, endless stress. Emma, his wife, worried about him. "You've got to slow down," she said one night as he sat hunched over blueprints at the kitchen table. "You can't keep this pace forever." He didn't look up. "I'll slow down when the war does." She sighed, brushing a hand over the worn notebook beside him, the same one he had used at Mare Island years earlier. "You already changed the world once, Ted. Maybe it's time to let it run." He smiled faintly. "Not yet." In May 1944, Nelson received an invitation to visit the Kaiser shipyards in Richmond. He arrived just as the morning shift began, and what he saw left him speechless. Rows upon rows of Liberty ships under construction, massive skeletons of steel, each covered with his welded studs. Over 30,000 workers swarmed across the site, assembling sections with machine-like precision. A foreman pointed proudly. "We're finishing ships in 4 days now, Mr. Nelson. 4 days from keel to launch." Ted could hardly believe it. What once took half a year now took less than a week. The idea that began in his small Vallejo garage had helped make such miracles possible. By mid-1944, his company had grown into one of the most critical suppliers in the war effort. They weren't building weapons, they were building the tools that built the weapons. Then, in December 1944, as the war dragged toward its bloody climax, Ted received word that his old workplace, Mare Island Naval Shipyard, wanted to honor him. It was the first time he'd returned since resigning in frustration 3 years earlier. The same steel gates greeted him, the same distant clang of hammers. But everything had changed. Submarines lined the docks, sleek and powerful. The men he once worked beside now used his welding guns as naturally as hammers. Captain Morrison, the supervisor who had once dismissed his sketches, met him at the entrance. His hair had grayed, his tone softened. "Mr. Nelson," he said, extending a hand, "you proved us all wrong." Ted hesitated for a moment, then shook his hand. "You were doing your duty, Captain." "So was I." They walked together through the submarine assembly hall. Everywhere he looked, men worked faster, safer, cleaner. The scaffolding that once cluttered the decks was gone. The dark compartments below were empty. No more workers crouched in cramped spaces, threading bolts. Morrison gestured toward the deck of a nearly finished submarine. "You see that? 1 day of work. Used to take us a week. Your studs did that." Ted smiled faintly. "Not mine anymore. Everyone's." When he returned to San Leandro, he found a telegram waiting on his desk. An invitation from the Navy Department to Washington. DC a week later, he stood in a conference hall surrounded by officers, engineers, and government officials. Secretary of the Navy. James Forrestal himself presented Ted with a citation for exceptional contribution to the United States war effort through technological innovation and industrial advancement. The applause was polite, formal, but when Ted took the microphone, his voice carried something deeper than pride. "I was told once that changing procedures takes years," he said, "but when the stakes are survival, it takes only courage. The men and women who weld in our shipyards are just as vital as those who fight at sea. We win this war with sparks as much as with shells." That night, as he walked alone past the Lincoln Memorial, the city quiet and dim under wartime blackout, Ted thought of the long road behind him, the frustration, the rejection, the sleepless nights in his garage. All of it had led to this moment. The war would soon end, but he knew the world would keep building, and his technology would keep shaping it. After Germany surrendered in May 1945, Nelson's company shifted focus to peacetime production. Bridges, skyscrapers, oil rigs, stud welding became the foundation of modern construction. The same guns that once helped win a war now helped build a nation. In the autumn of that year, Ted returned once more to Mare Island. The war was over. The air smelled of salt and paint instead of smoke. Workers were dismantling scaffolds for the last time, laughing, singing, no rush, no fear. He stood at the pier watching the newly launched submarine slide into the water. The crowd cheered as it touched the sea. A young reporter approached him. "Mr. Nelson, what do you think when you see this?" Ted smiled. "I think about the men who built it, and I think about all the hours they'll never have to spend crouched in the dark again." The reporter laughed. "You mean your welding gun?" He nodded. "No, I mean a better way." Years later, when Nelson passed away, the Navy sent a letter to his widow, Emma. It read simply, "Because of your husband's work, the United States Navy built faster, sailed sooner, and fought stronger. His invention saved time. That time saved lives. And in every shipyard, every spark that jumped between steel and stud carried the same legacy. A reminder that sometimes the greatest weapon of war isn't a bomb or a gun, but an idea forged in frustration, tempered by courage, and welded forever."